In the heart of a dense, misty forest, a small child named Emily wandered too far from her family's camping site. It was a quiet, peaceful morning, but for Emily, something felt strange. She had been playing in the woods when suddenly, everything looked unfamiliar. The trees seemed taller, the shadows darker, and the sounds of the forest made her heart race with fear. As she walked deeper, her feet stumbled over roots and rocks, and soon, she couldn't find her way back. But there was someone who wouldn't let her stay lost. K9 Officer Max, a highly trained police dog, was sitting quietly in the patrol car with his handler, Officer Thompson. Max had been with Officer Thompson for years, and they shared a bond stronger than most people could ever understand. They had saved countless lives together, but this time, the stakes were higher. Emily's parents had called for help, frantic after realizing their little girl had gone missing. The search team was out in full force, but Max's keen sense of smell could lead them to Emily faster than anyone else. As Max sniffed the air, Officer Thompson gave him a quiet command, "Find her, Max." The dog's eyes locked onto his handlers, filled with determination. They both knew this was more than just a mission, it was personal. Emily was a child, and Max had a deep love for children. He could feel it in his heart that today, he needed to be her hero. The clock was ticking. Would they find Emily in time? The forest was vast, and every minute counted. But Max had never failed before, and today, he was determined not to let that happen. This story is about the unbreakable bond between a loyal dog and his partner, and how that bond would lead them to an unexpected, life-changing moment. The search was on. Max raced through the dense forest, his nose to the ground, following the faint scent trail of little Emily. Officer Thompson, steady at his side, urged him forward, his voice calm but urgent. "Good boy, Max. We're getting closer." But even Max's sharp senses couldn't keep up with the growing panic in the air. The forest, once a peaceful place, had now become a labyrinth of confusion. Meanwhile, Emily was lost in the wilderness, and her fear had reached a breaking point. The sound of distant birds and rustling leaves only deepened her sense of isolation. Tears ran down her cheeks as she called out for her parents, but her voice was swallowed by the thick woods. She stumbled and fell, scraping her knees, but the pain was nothing compared to the fear gnawing at her heart. She couldn't understand how she had wandered so far from her family. Max, despite his expert training, started to feel the weight of the challenge. The trail was faint, and the dense trees made it harder to track the little girl. The clock was ticking, and with every passing second, Emily's situation became more dangerous. What if she wandered farther away? What if she couldn't hold on much longer? The tension was thick, and the closer they got, the more the urgency grew. Suddenly, Max paused. He lifted his nose, catching a new scent, a mixture of fear and the unmistakable smell of a child. His body tensed, and without a moment's hesitation, he dashed forward, pulling Officer Thompson along with him. But just as they thought they were getting close, the sound of a rustling branch echoed from deep within the forest. Was it Emily, or was it something more dangerous lurking in the shadows? This moment marked the beginning of a terrifying race against time. Would Max reach Emily before the woods claimed her further? Max's paws pounded the forest floor as he sprinted forward, following the scent trail that led him deeper into the woods. His muscles ached, his breath quickened, but there was no stopping him. He knew the stakes were high. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity, and Emily's life depended on his speed and skill. He had faced countless dangerous situations, but this felt different. This was personal. He had to find her. Officer Thompson, trailing closely behind, was struggling to keep up. He had always trusted Max's abilities, but the forest was dense and the terrain was rough. His heart raced with anxiety, his mind racing through all the possibilities. "Come on, Max, we're so close," he muttered, trying to push his own exhaustion aside. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows that made the forest even more intimidating. He wiped the sweat from his brow, his nerves starting to fray. He could feel the weight of the situation on his shoulders, but he had to stay strong, for Max and for Emily. Meanwhile, Emily's situation was growing worse with each passing minute. She had been lost for hours now, and her small body was exhausted from the endless walking. Her stomach growled with hunger, but there was no food in sight. The cold air of the evening sent shivers down her spine, and every sound in the forest made her jump. She couldn't see clearly anymore. Her eyes were filled with tears of frustration and fear. She was so alone. Her hope had begun to fade. She had lost track of time and couldn't remember how long she had been wandering. Her legs were sore, and her breath was shallow. She called out again, but there was no answer. She curled up under a tree, trying to stay warm, her eyes closing in exhaustion. "Please, someone find me," she whispered, her voice breaking. Back on the search, Max was feeling the strain too. His energy was being pushed to its limits, but the bond he shared with Officer Thompson kept him moving forward. His paws were bloody from running through rough terrain, and his breathing was labored, but he refused to stop. The thought of Emily, cold and scared in the woods, gave him the strength to keep going. Every now and then, Max would stop, his ears perked, sniffing the air. Officer Thompson would watch him closely, praying that Max would lead them to the right spot. But as they ventured further into the forest, the darkness began to close in. The forest seemed endless, and the tension was unbearable. Each passing minute felt like a loss, and Max's determination only grew stronger. Then, in the distance, they heard a faint cry, a small, frightened voice that pierced through the silence of the forest. "Emily." Max's ears perked up, and with a burst of energy, he took off running again, faster than before. Officer Thompson followed closely, his heart pounding in his chest. Could they make it to her in time? Would Emily be okay? The struggle wasn't over yet, but they were getting closer. Max's heart raced as he bolted through the underbrush, Officer Thompson struggling to keep pace behind him. The faint cry they had heard earlier was growing louder, but so was the fear in Max's chest. His instincts were screaming. Something wasn't right. The air felt heavier, and the forest seemed to close in around them. It was as if the trees themselves were trying to keep them from reaching Emily. Max pushed forward, the distance between him and Officer Thompson widening with each stride. His paws were torn and bloodied from the rough terrain, his sides heaving with exhaustion. But he could hear Emily's cries now, clear and desperate. She was out there, but where? Suddenly, Max skidded to a halt. Ahead of him, there was a steep ravine, too dangerous for a child to cross. The edge was lined with jagged rocks, and the ground was slippery from a recent rain. Max's nose twitched as he scented the air. There was Emily's scent, but it was coming from the other side of the ravine. She was too close, yet so far away. Officer Thompson reached Max's side and looked down at the ravine in shock. His eyes widened, panic rising in his chest. "Emily," he shouted, his voice cracking. He could see nothing but thick trees and the looming chasm. His hands trembled as he reached for his radio, but Max's steady, determined gaze stopped him. The dog was already moving, his mind made up. Without hesitation, Max leaped. His body soared through the air with all his strength, landing just barely on the other side of the ravine. His legs buckled under him, but he quickly regained his footing. Max's breathing was labored, and his vision blurred from the physical toll, but nothing was going to stop him now. He could hear Emily's faint sobbing on the other side. The world around him felt silent, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Max had made it across, but the real challenge had only just begun. His body ached, but he refused to slow down. He followed Emily's scent through the dense underbrush, his every step a mixture of determination and desperation. Max reached a small clearing, and there she was, curled up against a tree, her eyes wide with fear. She looked up, her tear-streaked face lighting up for the first time. "Max," she whispered, her voice breaking. Max approached her slowly, every step filled with love and relief. This was it, the moment he had fought for, the moment he would never let her out of his reach again. Max's tail wagged weakly as he reached Emily, his body still trembling from the effort of his search. He nudged her gently with his nose, his eyes filled with reassurance and love. Emily, barely able to hold back her tears, reached out and hugged him tightly. She whispered softly, "You found me." Her voice trembled with relief, and she wrapped her small arms around him, holding on as if she never wanted to let go. The fear that had gripped her for hours slowly began to fade, replaced by the warmth of this brave animal's presence. Max licked her face, his way of comforting her, telling her everything would be all right. The forest no longer seemed as dark and frightening. Emily felt a deep sense of comfort, realizing she was not alone anymore. The dog that had come to her rescue, despite not knowing him, was now her protector. Max gently nudged her again, urging her to move, as he knew they couldn't stay here much longer. Emily, still shaken but finding strength in his presence, slowly got up. Together, they began their journey back through the forest, the path still treacherous, but somehow less daunting with Max by her side. She followed closely behind, feeling an unspoken bond forming between them as they moved forward. Just then, Officer Thompson appeared on the other side of the ravine, his face filled with relief. He had found a safer route to cross and, with careful steps, made his way toward Emily and Max. "We got you, kiddo," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he scooped Emily into his arms. She clung to him, her arms around his neck, as Max trotted behind them, ever watchful and protective. As they walked back towards safety, the forest, which had seemed so dark and dangerous hours ago, felt a little brighter. Emily's sobs of relief echoed through the trees as they made their way to the edge of the woods. Max had done it. He had found her and kept her safe. The sun had finally set, casting a soft, golden glow over the forest as Officer Thompson, Max, and Emily made their way home. Emily was safe in her father's arms, her eyes closing in exhaustion but a peaceful smile playing on her lips. Max trotted beside them, his head held high, proud of the bond he had formed with Emily during their time in the forest. Though they hadn't known each other before, the trust Max had shown in protecting her and the love she felt for him after his rescue made them feel like family in that moment. Back at the police station, Max received the warmest of welcomes from the officers. His bravery had saved a life, and they all acknowledged what a hero he truly was. But for Max, the reward was simpler. He had done his job, and Emily was safe. After the rescue, Emily was often seen with Max at the station. Her father, Officer Thompson, would bring her to visit Max during his breaks, and slowly, a friendship blossomed. The bond between Emily and Max grew stronger every day, from playing fetch at the park to Max lying by her side whenever she needed comfort. Animals like Max are heroes in their own right. If you're looking for a loyal companion, remember, there are so many animals in need of a home. Adopt, don't shop. Support your local shelters and give a forever home to an animal who needs it. They give so much in return.